To be honest, I've never been a great student or listener in general, so I don't know if it's just me, but I have no clue what George Washington did while he was the president, or what he really even did at all. For all I know, he could have been some really fucked up drug dealer. This has been bugging me more than I'd like to admit. I've been losing sleep over this dude, and it's starting to scare me. So lucky or not, for you today, we're going to be discussing the life and work of George. For some reason, he didn't have a middle name, Washington. Welcome to History with Keith and Gandhi. On February 22nd, 1732, Marybelle Washington gave birth to her eldest son, donning him the name of George. Now, I don't know why she chose the name George, because, there's definitely a lot better things out there. You're naming the president here, and you name him George? It's the same name as a monkey. She could have definitely gone with something better, like Zephaniah or Mahatma. Nevertheless, George spent the early parts of his life being educated by private tutors and learning how to be a real plantation man. Life was swell until George's father abruptly died at the age of 48 on April 12, 1743. I swear, I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out how this man's died, and I still have no idea. No one cared about this dude. If I had to make a guess with my expert historical knowledge, I'd probably go with something like the bubonic plague. If you want my secret theory though, alien abduction. This left George to be the man and run his family's business. There was only one problem. George was only 11 years old. Young Washington didn't have too many difficulties with this though, and grew into a nice, intelligent, dashing young man. At age 15, the future president got his first job as a state surveyor. I had no idea what a surveyor was, but turns out it's just kind of like being a food critic, except with land. He'd basically just go around and be like, 9 out of 10, too many trees. This job would serve him well, and he would rise to be one of Virginia's top surveyors. This would lead to the colony's political heads calling on him to do them a favor. So during this time, the French really hated the British, so they decided to be a super cool prank to go and invade the British's land. Turns out the British really hated that, they really got pissed off, and they're like, hey George, go tell him to get the fuck out, this is our land. So we did. And in response, the French started a war. The French and Indian War lasted from 1754 to 1763. Each state had regiments with soldiers that they sent to aid in the war. The Virginian colonies decided to have George Washington lead their regiment, even though he had no prior experience in the military. Now, I don't know why they chose George to lead them into battle, because he was a rookie at this. Either he was really, really good at surveying the land, or they were hella desperate. George led his men to many valiant fights, slaughtering hundreds of millions of French. He even single-handedly defeated 100 French on his own, with only an avocado. Yeah, that's not true. I'm sure he was good at his job at everything since they made him commander-in-chief later on, but he wasn't cool enough to get any stories in this war. To be honest, I don't really know if he even wanted to be there. By 1759, George had abandoned his role as commander and left to live his life back in Mount Vernon, his family estate. This was not in vain though, as he quickly married his newfound lover, Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow of 2 children. Fun fact, although Washington became a very passionate stepfather, he never actually had any children of his own. Sorry, but I just gotta take a second to appreciate George Washington's pull-out game. Stuff like that can't go unnoticed. His timing was on point. During this time, he decided to join the Virginia House of Burgesses, representing Frederick County. This would get his feet wet in the political game and start the process of establishing George as a true political powerhouse in early America. George also worked on expanding the estate in which he inherited, going from 2,000 to 8,000 acres. He would start encountering more taxation from the British while doing this though, which planted a seed in his head of starting a rebellion. So after the British beat the French in the French and Indian War, They were in a lot of debt. Like, I don't know what they did, but they screwed up somewhere down the road. They decided the best way to get over this was to tax the hell out of the Americans, which didn't fly by him. Especially George, and pissed him off like hell. So, he became one of the figureheads for the American independence movement. George would continue to be involved in the movement while spending some of his time in upstate New York until 1775, when he was chosen to lead the rebellious army in the American Revolution. The American Revolution lasted from 1775 to 1783, and to start off, the Americans were at a huge disadvantage. Turns out the Americans had really, really bad guns. When you start fighting with the one person that gives you your materials, you're kinda screwed. I swear, if you went to Target today and bought yourself a Super Soaker, you could hardly tell the difference. This would prove to be huge, because not only did the Americans have trash guns, they were also huge pussies. They would run whenever they saw the chance of the fight. They sucked ass. George Washington would have to employ new strategies to give the Americans a chance. So for some reason, the British employed this military strategy where all their dudes just walked in one single file line, like they're in school or something. The Americans said, hey, let's not do that anymore, and employed the strategy of guerrilla warfare. So they hid in the bushes and fired from there, and it proved to be pretty effective. These strategies would help somewhat, but the Americans were still losing the war. It would lead to the point where George Washington decided to make the risky decision to cross the Delaware to reclaim New Jersey as a sneak attack on Christmas Day. Really? He really ruined the British's Christmas like that? Like, even for them, that's fucked up, man. You know how cold that water must have been for his soldiers? It was the middle of the night. Dude, it's Jersey. Who cares? This sneak attack worked and effectively kept hope for freedom alive. After this battle, Washington and his men flipped the tide of the war, leading to their eventual victory in 1783. Fun fact, George was actually a horrible military strategist. He was a good leader and everything, but when it came down to the X's and the O's, mans be trippin'. With the war over, George decided that was enough action for his life and immediately bounced back to Mount Vernon. Like, he really wanted to leave. There must have been some kind of secret beef going on between him and Benjamin Franklin, because once the war was over, that man took his check and bounced. But he was only able to stay there for a short time. After the failure of the Articles of Confederation, the politicians decided they only wanted one man to lead their country under the newly founded Constitution, George Washington. George tried to refuse many times, but after constant annoyance, he obliged. In a landslide of an election, George Washington became America's first president. The other candidate was John Adams. Who was gonna vote for John Adams? He's the most white man I've ever heard of. It'd be like voting for Mike Pence today. During his time in office, George made many accomplishments. He appointed the first Supreme Justice, John Jay, made Alexander Hamilton Secretary of Treasury, signed the first copyright laws, stopped the Whiskey Rebellion, and set a high standard for presidents to come. George basically knew that he would set the foundation for how all presidents after him would act, so he tried to be as basic as possible. Like, the dude literally had no opinions. Foreign policy? Be as neutral as possible. Political parties? Let's not have any. Let's all be friends around here. The reason we don't learn that much about what he did is because he tried to not do anything. Nice to know even the president's lazy sometimes. After spending 2 terms as president, George Washington returned to his home in Mount Vernon. He honestly probably could have served again, but I'm telling you, he hated these dudes. He was trying to figure out every way to get out. George Washington was an American hero, setting the precedent for how politicians and presidents would conduct themselves for centuries to come. For a boy who ended his education at age 15, he truly was one of the most accomplished men in American history. If you like the content you saw in this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. George would certainly appreciate it. Till next time, boys.